My stepmother didn't book a room for me on our family trip. My stepsister mocked. We reserved rooms for the real family, not a bastard, my child and husband. We're the real family. I calmly said, then I'll leave, and walked out. Hours later, after ignoring dozens of their calls, something unthinkable happened. The lobby of the Grand Meridian smelled like white flowers and money. I remember that detail because I was standing there, suitcase in hand, watching my stepmother's face cycle through expressions I'd spent 17 years learning to read. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the concierge, and I could tell from the particular tightness around her mouth that something had gone wrong with her careful plans. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the young man behind the desk was saying, his voice professionally sympathetic. "We only have 4 rooms reserved under that name. I've checked twice." 4 rooms. For a party of 9, my father stood slightly apart from the group, scrolling through his phone the way he always did when family dynamics threatened to require his participation. My stepmother, Linda, had organized this trip to celebrate her daughter's engagement. My stepsister, Meredith, who was currently examining her manicure with the studied boredom of someone who expected the world to arrange itself around her comfort. Meredith's fiancé, Bradley, was helping the bellhop with their excessive luggage. Meredith's son from her first marriage, 7-year-old Connor, was whining about the flight. Linda's sister, Aunt Patricia, and her husband were already heading toward the elevators, uninterested in logistics that didn't concern them. And me. I was the 9th person, the one Linda had apparently forgotten to count. "There must be a mistake," Linda said, her voice carrying that particular edge she reserved for service workers who failed to meet her expectations. "I booked 5 rooms. I have the confirmation." The concierge maintained his composure. "I'd be happy to check again, ma'am, but our records show—" "Let me see." Linda snatched the paperwork he offered, her eyes scanning the page. I watched her shoulders tense, then deliberately relax. She'd seen something, understood something, and now she was calculating. "Well," she said, turning to face the group with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "it seems there was a small mix-up with the booking, but we can make it work. Patricia and Howard have their room, Tom and I have ours, Meredith and Bradley have theirs, and Connor will share with—" She stopped, looked at me, and I saw the moment she decided to commit to the lie. "Olivia, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I must have miscounted when I made the reservation. You understand, don't you? With the engagement celebration and all the planning, things slipped through the cracks." I understood perfectly. Nothing had slipped. Nothing ever slipped with Linda. She planned everything with the precision of a military campaign. She simply hadn't booked a room for me because she hadn't wanted me here in the first place. "It's fine," I said, my voice neutral. "I can get my own room." "Oh, I'm sure the hotel is fully booked," Linda said quickly. "It's peak season, but Connor can sleep on a rollaway in our suite and you could share with—" "Actually," the concierge interjected, clearly trying to be helpful, "we do have availability, several rooms in fact. Would you like me to check rates?" Linda's smile flickered. "That won't be necessary. Olivia, you can just share with Meredith and Bradley. They have a suite with a sitting area. I'm sure the couch—" "I'm not sharing my honeymoon practice suite with her," Meredith said, not bothering to look up from her nails. "Brad and I need privacy. This is supposed to be romantic." "You're not married yet," I pointed out. Meredith finally met my eyes, and I saw the same calculation her mother had just performed, the same assessment of what she could get away with. "Close enough," she said. "Besides, we reserved these rooms for the real family." The words landed in the lobby like a stone dropped into still water. I felt the ripple move through me, familiar as breathing. "Meredith," my father said, his voice carrying a warning I'd stopped believing in years ago. "What? I'm just saying." Meredith set down her hand and fixed me with a look of pure, concentrated dismissal. "We reserved rooms for the real family, not for—" She glanced at Connor, then back at me. "For people who don't actually belong here. My son is real family. My husband, my future husband, is real family. We're the real family." She didn't say the word. She didn't have to. It hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. Bastard. The word I'd heard whispered at family gatherings since I was 8 years old, when my father had married Linda and brought me into their perfect picture. My father's phone chimed. He looked down at it, and I watched him choose, the way I'd watched him choose 1,000 times before. "I have to take this," he said, already moving away. "Linda, handle it. Handle me." The inconvenient evidence of his first marriage, the daughter who didn't fit the family portrait Linda had been carefully composing for nearly 2 decades. I looked at Linda, looked at Meredith, looked at the shining marble floors and the crystal chandeliers and the white flowers that smelled like money, and realized with a clarity that felt like cold water that I was done. "Then I'll leave," I said. The words came out calm, measured. The same voice I'd been using for 17 years to navigate their casual cruelties, their pointed exclusions, their persistent campaign to remind me that I was tolerated but not wanted. Linda blinked. "What?" I said, "I'll leave." I picked up my suitcase, the one I'd packed with clothes for a week-long celebration I'd never wanted to attend. "You reserved rooms for the real family. I'm not real family, so I'll go." "Olivia, don't be dramatic." Linda's voice sharpened. "We can figure something out. You're making a scene." "I'm not making a scene. I'm leaving." I turned toward the door, and something in my chest loosened. "Have a nice trip." "Olivia." My father had finished his call, or ended it, I couldn't tell. He was walking toward me, his face arranged in the expression he wore when he needed to manage a situation. "Let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about." I kept walking. "Meredith's right. This is a trip for real family. I don't qualify." "That's not what she meant." I stopped, turned, looked at my father directly, something I'd learned to avoid because it only led to disappointment. "Yes, it is," I said. "It's exactly what she meant." "And you know it." He didn't answer. He never did, not when it mattered. I walked out of the Grand Meridian, past the doormen and the valets and the luxury vehicles disgorging wealthy guests. I walked until the building was behind me, until the salt air from the nearby beach had replaced the scent of white flowers, until my phone started buzzing in my pocket. I didn't answer. I found a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hotel, the kind of place that catered to tourists but hadn't completely lost its soul. I ordered a latte and sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the water orange and pink. My phone had become a small vibrating creature in my pocket, demanding attention I had no intention of giving. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. 14 missed calls, 23 text messages, all from numbers I recognized. Linda, Meredith, my father, even Aunt Patricia, who had never voluntarily spoken to me in the decade plus I'd been her reluctant niece. I turned the phone face down on the table and watched the light change over the water. There was something almost peaceful about this moment. For 17 years, I'd bent myself into shapes designed to fit their expectations, to minimize their complaints, to earn a place at a table that was never really set for me. I'd attended family dinners where Linda seated me at the corner, always at the corner, close enough to be present but far enough to be overlooked. I'd smiled through holidays where my gifts were afterthoughts, my accomplishments mentioned, and then quickly overshadowed by Meredith's. I'd learned to make myself small, quiet, undemanding. And for what? Not for a bastard. Meredith's voice echoed in my head. We're the real family. The funny thing was, she wasn't even legally right. My parents had been married when I was born, they'd divorced when I was 3, and my mother had died 2 years later. A car accident, quick and final, leaving me in the care of a father who had already moved on to Linda and the ready-made family she provided. But legitimacy had never been Linda's point. The point was belonging. The point was blood. The point was that I would always be the evidence of a life my father wanted to forget. And she would spend our shared years making sure I never forgot my place. Well, I was done forgetting. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up, not to answer, but to see what desperation looked like in text form. Linda, 6:47 p.m. This is ridiculous. Come back to the hotel. Linda, 6:52 p.m. You're embarrassing your father. Linda, 7:01 p.m. Oh, we can discuss this like adults. Dad, 7:15 p.m. Olivia, answer your phone. Meredith, 7:23 p.m. Way to make my engagement celebration about you. Thanks. Linda, 7:34 p.m. I've spoken to the hotel. They can find you a room. Come back. I laughed at that one, laughed out loud, drawing a curious glance from the barista. Now they could find me a room. Now that I'd called their bluff, suddenly accommodations were possible. I typed a response to Linda, the first I'd sent since walking out. Me. No thank you. Have a nice trip. Then I turned off my phone. Here's what you need to understand about my life. I was never supposed to succeed. Not that Linda ever said it directly. She was too smart for that. Too skilled at plausible deniability. But the message was woven through everything, the subtle discouragements, the pointed comparisons, the way she'd mentioned Meredith's achievements in conversations about my future, as if to remind me of the standard I would never meet. Meredith had gotten into her first-choice college, legacy admission, plus a building donation, but that was never mentioned. Meredith had married well, the first time briefly. It ended in a divorce. Linda pretended never happened. Meredith had produced a grandchild, Connor, who was spoiled and unpleasant and treated like royalty. I had worked my way through school on scholarships and part-time jobs. I had graduated with honors and no debt. I had built a career in data analysis, which Linda described at parties as something with computers. While spending 20 minutes explaining Meredith's part-time interior decorating hobby, I had also, over the past 3 years, made some investments that had performed well, very well, better than anyone in my family knew, because I had learned early that sharing good news only gave Linda ammunition for dismissal. Oh, Olivia's little stock thing? That's nice. Meredith is redecorating the governor's lake house. So I'd kept quiet, kept my head down, kept waiting for something I couldn't name. Permission, maybe, or acknowledgement, or the moment when my father would finally see me and choose me over the family he'd built to replace the one he'd lost. Sitting in that coffee shop, watching the last light fade over the water, I finally understood that moment was never coming. My phone was off, my family was 3 blocks away, presumably managing their celebration without the complication of my presence. And I was free. It was a strange feeling, not quite happiness, not quite sadness. Something closer to the sensation of setting down a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it had shape. I finished my latte, paid, walked out into the evening air. I had no plan. For the first time in my adult life, I had no carefully considered next step, no contingency, no backup. I'd paid for my flight here with the expectation of staying at the hotel Linda had booked, and I'd assumed, foolishly, apparently, that she would include me in the basic logistics of the trip. I had money, I had options. What I didn't have was any desire to spend them in this town, breathing the same air as people who had spent 17 years reminding me that I didn't belong. I started walking toward the marina, not because I had a destination, but because the water was beautiful and I wanted to be near something beautiful. That was when I saw the yacht. It was the kind of vessel that made you stop and stare, even if you weren't particularly interested in boats. White and sleek and massive, easily 100 feet long, lit up against the darkening sky like a floating palace. I wasn't the only one looking. A small crowd had gathered on the dock, tourists taking photos, locals admiring the craftsmanship. The yacht's name was painted on the stern in elegant script, the Meridian Star. Nice, isn't she? I turned. A woman about my age was standing beside me, holding a camera. Her smile friendly and a little conspiratorial. It's gorgeous, I admitted. Do you know who owns it? Some tech billionaire, I think. They docked here yesterday. Rumor is they're staying a few days. She lowered her voice. I work at the restaurant across the street. We've been trying to get them to book a private dinner, but apparently they have their own chef. Of course they do, she laughed. Right? Must be nice. She glanced at me, taking in my suitcase, my tired face. You okay? You look a little idle. I'm fine, I said automatically. Then, more honestly, I'm just figuring out where to sleep tonight. Hotel problems? Family problems. She nodded with the kind of understanding that suggested she had some of her own. There's a bed and breakfast on Coral Street. Family owned, nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. Tell them Maria sent you, they'll give you a good rate. Thank you. I meant it. Kindness from strangers was still surprising to me, even after all these years. Linda had trained me to expect strings attached to every generosity. Maria smiled. Good luck with whatever you're figuring out. She headed off toward the restaurant she'd mentioned, camera swinging from her strap. I stood there a moment longer, looking at the yacht, thinking about the different lives people lived. Somewhere on that boat, someone was probably sipping champagne and not worrying about whether they belonged. Somewhere else in this town, my family was sitting down to dinner and discussing how dramatic I was being. And here I was, standing on a dock with a suitcase, finally free of expectations I'd never been able to meet. I found the bed and breakfast Maria had mentioned. It was exactly as she'd described, small, clean, quiet, run by an older couple who asked no questions about why I was checking in alone with red-rimmed eyes. The room was simple, with white curtains and a view of a courtyard garden, and when I lay down on the bed, I slept better than I had in years. I woke to sunlight and the realization that I had no idea what to do with myself. For 17 years, my role in family events had been carefully scripted. Attend, contribute, disappear when convenient, reappear when required. I knew my lines, I knew my blocking, I knew the exact smile that would satisfy Linda without appearing too happy, which she would interpret as mockery, or too centered, which she would interpret as manipulation. Now the script was gone, and I was improvising. I turned on my phone. The notifications cascaded down the screen like a waterfall of disappointment. 47 missed calls, over 100 text messages, 3 voicemails I had no intention of listening to. I scrolled through the texts, not to respond, but to understand the shape of their desperation. Linda, 11:43 p.m. This is childish, Olivia. Call me back. Dad, 11:58 p.m. We need to talk about what happened. Meredith, 12:15 a.m. You always have to make everything about you. This is my celebration. Linda, 7:02 a.m. I've tried to reach you all night. Your father is worried. I doubted that. My father's worry was a selective thing, deployed when convenient and abandoned when inconvenient. He hadn't worried when Linda seated me in the servants' quarters at Meredith's first wedding. He hadn't worried when I spent Christmas alone during college because flights home were too expensive, while Meredith received a car for graduation. He hadn't worried about any of the small cruelties his wife and stepdaughter inflicted because worrying would require him to act, and acting would require him to choose. My father had made his choice 17 years ago. He'd chosen the path of least resistance, which meant choosing Linda, which meant choosing to let me fade into the background of his new perfect life. I wasn't angry about it anymore. I was just done. Me to Linda. I'm fine. I found somewhere to stay. Please enjoy your trip. Me to Dad. I'm fine. I turned the phone off again before they could respond. The bed and breakfast served a simple breakfast in their courtyard. Fresh fruit, pastries, strong coffee, and I ate slowly, watching hummingbirds visit the flowering bushes, thinking about nothing in particular. The owner, Mrs. Chen, stopped by my table to refill my coffee. Maria said you might need a few days. We have the room available if you want to extend. Thank you, I said. I might. I'm not sure yet. Take your time. She smiled, the kind of smile that asked nothing in return. Sometimes it's good not to be sure. I spent the morning walking. The town was beautiful in the way beach towns often are. Pastel buildings, narrow streets, the constant presence of water. I wandered without direction, stopping to look at shop windows, sitting on benches to watch the boats in the harbor. At one point, I passed the Grand Meridian. I didn't slow down, didn't look toward the entrance. But I felt the building's presence like a pressure against my chest. Somewhere inside, Linda was probably organizing the day's activities, assigning roles, directing the family toward their marks. I wasn't part of that production anymore. The understudy had finally walked off the stage. It was early afternoon when I found myself back at the marina, looking at the yacht I'd admired the night before. The Meridian Star was still there, somehow more impressive in daylight, all clean lines and obvious wealth. Beautiful, isn't she? I turned. A man was standing nearby, late 30s or early 40s, dressed casually but in the way that suggested his casual clothes cost more than most people's formal ones. He was looking at the yacht with obvious appreciation. "It's incredible," I said. "Are you the owner?" He laughed, an easy sound. "No, just an admirer. I'm in town for a conference. Came down to the marina to clear my head and found myself staring at this thing for the past 20 minutes. I know the feeling." He glanced at me, and something in his expression shifted. Not recognition exactly, but assessment. I was used to being assessed. Usually I came up short. "Conference boring?" I asked, mostly to fill the silence. "Incredibly, 18 hours of people talking about quarterly projections and market disruption. I started fantasizing about stealing that yacht and sailing somewhere no one cares about market disruption." "Where would that be?" He considered. "Somewhere with good food and no cell service." "That sounds ideal." We stood there for a moment, two strangers bonding over shared appreciation of expensive boats and the desire to escape. Then his phone buzzed, and the spell broke. "That's my cue," he said, checking the screen. "Break's over. Nice talking to you." "You too." He walked off toward the street, already responding to whatever message had summoned him. I stayed, looking at the yacht, thinking about escape and what it actually meant. I had dinner alone at the restaurant Maria worked at, a small seafood place with outdoor seating and fairy lights strung through the trees. She stopped by my table to say hello, asked how the bed and breakfast was working out, recommended the grilled snapper. "You look better," she said, studying my face. "Less haunted." "I feel better," I admitted. "I'm not sure why. Nothing's actually changed." "Sometimes nothing changing is the change." She shrugged. "Anyway, let me know if you need anything. My shift ends at 9 if you want company for a drink." I almost said no. Solitude had become my default, the safe choice, the path that led to the fewest complications. But something about this trip, maybe walking away from the hotel, maybe sleeping without dreaming, had shifted something inside me. "That sounds nice," I said. Maria grinned. "Cool. I'll find you after." We ended up at a bar down the street, a place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, and a bartender who knew Maria's name. I ordered wine. She ordered something complicated with rum. "So," she said once we were settled. "Family problems? Want to talk about it?" I didn't, usually, but the wine was good and the bar was warm and Maria had a way of listening that made talking feel safe. "My stepmother didn't book me a room for our family trip," I said. "My stepsister called me a bastard." I walked out. Maria's eyebrows rose. "Wow, that's..." "Yeah. And the rest of your family just let that happen?" "My father was on a phone call." I took a long sip of wine. "He's always on a phone call, or in a meeting, or somewhere else, physically or mentally. He checked out of parenting me around the time he checked into his second marriage. That's horrible. It's just how it is." I'd never said that out loud before. Hearing the words in my own voice, I realized how sad they sounded. I've spent 17 years trying to earn my place at the table, trying to be good enough, quiet enough, successful enough, and none of it mattered. I was never going to belong because they never wanted me to. Maria was quiet for a moment, swirling her drink. "So what now?" "I don't know." The honest answer. "I have a room at the bed and breakfast. I have a return flight in 5 days. Beyond that," I shrugged. "I'm improvising. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It feels strange. I'm not good at not having a plan. Maybe that's the point." Maria leaned back in her chair. "Sometimes you have to throw out the plan to figure out what you actually want." What I actually wanted? It was such a simple question, and I had no idea how to answer it. We talked for another hour about her job, her dreams of opening her own restaurant, the complicated relationship she had with her mother, who wanted her to be a lawyer. By the time we said goodnight, I felt lighter than I had in years. I walked back to the bed and breakfast through quiet streets, the salt air cool against my skin. My phone was still off, I had no idea what was happening at the Grand Meridian, and for the first time, I didn't care. The next 2 days passed in a kind of peaceful blur. I slept late. I ate breakfast in the courtyard. I walked on the beach, collecting shells without any particular purpose. I had dinner at Maria's restaurant again, tried the grilled snapper as promised, discovered it was excellent. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I watched sunsets without taking pictures of them. I had long conversations with Mrs. Chen about her garden, her grandchildren, the changes she'd seen in the town over 40 years of running the bed and breakfast. I didn't turn on my phone. It was the longest I'd gone without checking for messages since I'd gotten my first cell phone at 15. The silence was strange at first, then peaceful, then something close to necessary. I was learning what my thoughts sounded like without the constant interference of other people's expectations. On the third day, Maria invited me to a beach bonfire with some friends. I almost said no. Crowds still made me nervous, and strangers even more so, but she was persuasive, and I was tired of my own caution. The bonfire was beautiful. 20 or so people gathered around flames on the sand, passing drinks and telling stories, the water a dark presence beyond the firelight. I sat next to Maria and listened more than I talked, content to be an observer rather than a participant. At some point, someone asked what had brought me to town. "Family trip," I said, the words automatic. "Where's your family?" another person asked. "At the Grand Meridian." There was a pause. The Grand Meridian was clearly the fancy hotel, the one that signaled money and status. "So why are you here?" Maria asked, though she knew the answer. I looked at the fire, at the way the flames moved, at the shadows they cast on the faces of people I didn't know. "Because that's not where I belong," I said. And somehow saying it out loud to strangers who had no investment in my family's drama made it true. I turned on my phone the next morning. The notification count had climbed to absurd numbers. Over 200 texts, nearly 100 calls, voicemails I would never listen to. I scrolled through them with a strange detachment, watching the progression of my family's emotions through their messages. Linda had moved through irritation to anger, to what she probably thought was concern. My father's messages grew increasingly formal, as if he were drafting corporate communications. Meredith's remained consistently furious, full of accusations about ruined celebrations and selfish behavior. There was one message that caught my attention, though. From Aunt Patricia, of all people. Aunt Patricia, yesterday, 3:47 p.m. Olivia, there's something you should know. Call me when you get this. Don't call Linda first. That was unexpected. Aunt Patricia had never voluntarily sought my communication before. She was Linda's sister, her co-conspirator, the one who laughed at Linda's jokes about my inadequacies and echoed her opinions about my unworthiness. I almost deleted the message, almost turned the phone off again, and returned to the peace I'd built over the past few days. But something made me hesitate. The tone of the message was different than I'd expected. Not hostile, not dismissive, almost concerned. I called her. She answered on the second ring, which suggested she'd been waiting. "Olivia, thank God." Her voice was low, hushed, as if she were afraid of being overheard. "Where are you?" "Not at the hotel." "I know that. Where are you?" I hesitated. Because... She stopped. I heard her take a breath. "Because I found something. In Linda's room. I wasn't snooping. I needed to borrow her steamer for Patricia's dress. But I found something, and you need to see it." "What is it?" "I can't..." Another pause. "I can't explain on the phone. Can you meet me somewhere? Away from the hotel?" I should have said no. Every instinct honed over 17 years of navigating Linda's manipulations told me this was a trap, a ploy, another move in a game I didn't want to play. But Aunt Patricia's voice had something I'd never heard in it before, something that sounded like guilt. "There's a coffee shop on Main Street," I said. "The one with the blue awning." "I know it. Half an hour." "Fine." I hung up and stared at my phone, wondering what I'd just agreed to. Aunt Patricia looked different than I'd ever seen her. Usually she was composed to the point of rigidity. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect posture that suggested she was always prepared for a society photograph. The woman who walked into the coffee shop was rumpled, anxious, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being followed. She spotted me at the corner table and hurried over, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Thank you for coming," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. I know, I've never—" She stopped, collected herself. "I've never been kind to you. I've followed Linda's lead, and it wasn't fair." I waited. I'd learned patience from years of having to wait for explanations that rarely came. Aunt Patricia opened her purse and pulled out a folder. A thin one, maybe a dozen pages, with a label I couldn't read from this angle. "I found this in Linda's room," she said, hidden in the back of her closet behind her shoe rack. "I only found it because I knocked something over while looking for the steamer." She pushed the folder across the table. I looked at it without touching it. "What is it?" "It's about your mother." The words hit me like cold water. My mother. The woman who had died when I was 5, whose existence Linda had systematically erased from our family's narrative, whose photographs my father had packed away for storage and never retrieved. "My mother has been dead for 22 years, I said carefully. "What could Linda possibly have—" "Just look." I opened the folder. The first page was a copy of a legal document, a life insurance policy. My mother's name was on it, Elena Thorne. The beneficiary listed was me. "I don't understand," I said, flipping to the next page. "I knew about the insurance policy. My father said the money went into a trust for my education." "Keep reading." The next few pages were bank statements, account numbers I didn't recognize, transactions I'd never seen, large sums moving between accounts, starting about a year after my mother's death and continuing for over a decade. Then a letter, handwritten on my father's stationery. "Linda, the Thorne Trust has been fully transferred per our arrangement. Olivia's education expenses should be minimal, given her scholarship eligibility, so we should be able to redirect most of the remaining funds to Meredith's needs. Make sure the account statements go to my office, not the house." I read the letter 3 times before the meaning fully registered. "They stole it," I heard myself say. "The life insurance, the trust my mother left for me, they stole it." Aunt Patricia's face was pale. "It gets worse." She reached over and turned to the last few pages of the folder. More bank statements, more recent ones. The accounts that had received my mother's money now showing different names. Meredith's name for her first wedding, Connor's name for his private school, Bradley's name for the startup he'd launched 2 years ago. My mother's legacy, stolen and redistributed to the family that had never wanted me. I sat with the folder for a long time after Aunt Patricia left. She'd apologized, she'd cried, even Patricia Chen, who I'd never seen express an emotion stronger than polite disapproval, had wept into her napkin and told me she'd had no idea. She'd thought Linda was difficult, yes, controlling certainly, but not this, not theft, not the systematic plundering of a dead woman's final gift to her daughter. I believed her. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did. Her shock was too raw to be performed. The folder sat on the table in front of me, its contents banal and damning, bank statements, transfer records, my father's handwriting casual and confident, instructing his wife on how to redirect my inheritance. I should have been angry. I should have been furious, devastated, broken, but sitting there in that coffee shop watching tourists walk by outside, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. For 17 years I'd wondered what was wrong with me. Why I couldn't earn Linda's approval, couldn't win my father's attention, couldn't find a place in a family that was supposed to be mine. I'd blamed myself. Not good enough, not pretty enough, not interesting enough. I'd twisted myself into shapes designed to please people who would never be pleased. But it had never been about me. It had been about money. My mother's money, the life insurance policy she'd taken out to protect me, the trust she'd established to ensure my future. Over $300,000, according to these statements. Gone. Spent on Meredith's wedding, Connor's education, Bradley's business venture. They'd stolen my inheritance, and they'd spent 17 years making me feel like I was the problem. I ordered another coffee, drank it slowly, thought about my options. I could confront them, walk into the Grand Meridian with the folder in hand, lay the evidence on the table, watch Linda's careful composure crumble. The thought was satisfying in a vindictive way. I could hire a lawyer, sue for recovery of the funds, drag my father and his wife through court, make their theft a matter of public record. Also satisfying, though more complicated and less immediate. Or I could do neither. I could take this knowledge, this clarity, this final proof of what I'd always suspected, and I could simply walk away. Not in defeat, but in understanding. Not because they'd won, but because I finally knew the game had been rigged from the start. The folder contained evidence of a crime. But it also contained something else. Freedom. I'd spent 17 years trying to belong to a family that had bought their comfort with my mother's death. Every rejection, every slight, every casual cruelty, they'd all been cover. Ways to keep me small and grateful, too focused on earning approval to notice that they were spending my money? Well, I noticed now. I walked back to the bed and breakfast with the folder in my bag and a strange calm in my chest. Mrs. Chen was in the courtyard, pruning her roses. She looked up as I approached, and something in my face must have told her that things had changed. "Olivia," she said, "are you all right?" "I am," I said, and meant it. "I think I'm finally going to be all right." She nodded, the way wise people do when they recognize a turning point. "The room is yours as long as you need it." "Thank you." I went upstairs and sat on the bed looking at the folder. Thinking I could still confront them. The evidence was clear, the theft was documented, the betrayal was undeniable. Part of me wanted to see Linda's face when she realized her careful deception had unraveled. Part of me wanted my father to finally acknowledge what he'd done, to look me in the eyes and admit that he'd sacrificed his daughter's inheritance to fund his second wife's family. But another part of me, a quieter part, a wiser part, understood that confrontation wouldn't give me what I really wanted. What I wanted was peace. What I wanted was a life that wasn't defined by their cruelty. What I wanted was to stop carrying the weight of their approval, their judgment, their constant assessment of my worth. The folder could give me revenge, but it couldn't give me back the 17 years I'd spent trying to belong. I made a decision. I called my father that evening. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp with the particular irritation he reserved for inconveniences. "Olivia, finally, where are you?" "I'm at a bed and breakfast in town." "You need to come back to the hotel. This has gone on long enough. Linda is upset. Meredith is upset. The whole trip has been—" "I'm not coming back." A pause. I heard him recalibrating, adjusting his approach. "Let's talk about this reasonably," he said. "Whatever happened in the lobby, I'm sure we can work it out. Families have disagreements. That's normal." "Do you know what else is normal in our family?" I kept my voice calm, steady. "Theft. Specifically, the theft of the trust my mother left me." The silence on the other end of the phone was so complete I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. "Where did you—" He stopped, started again. "I don't know what you think you found, but—" "I found the bank statements. I found the transfer records. I found the letter you wrote to Linda about redirecting the Thorn Trust to Meredith's needs." Nothing. Just breathing. "You stole my inheritance, I said. "You and Linda took the money my mother left to protect me, and you used it to pay for your other daughter's wedding, your other grandson's school, your other daughter's fiancé's business. You spent 17 years treating me like an inconvenience, and the whole time you were spending my mother's money on the family you actually wanted." "Olivia," his voice had changed. The sharpness was gone, replaced by something softer, more dangerous, damage control mode. "Let's meet somewhere and discuss this. I'm sure there are things you don't understand about the situation." "What don't I understand? That you forged documents to access a trust meant for your minor child? That you and Linda systematically drained an account that was legally mine? That you've been lying to me for over 2 decades? It's more complicated than that." "Then explain it to me." He couldn't, of course. There was no explanation that would justify what he'd done. No context that would make it acceptable. He'd stolen from his dead wife's memory to fund his new family's wants, and he'd spent nearly 2 decades making me feel worthless to cover his tracks. "I'll get a lawyer," I said. "I'll recover what you took, or I'll make sure everyone knows what you did, or—" I paused. "Or we can end this quietly. You acknowledge what you did. You pay back what you stole. and we never speak again. You can't be serious, adult. I'm completely serious. Linda will never... This isn't about Linda. This is about you, my father, the man who was supposed to protect me. My voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion I'd allowed myself. You failed. Spectacularly and continuously, but I'm giving you one chance to make it right. The silence stretched. I could almost hear him calculating. The cost of legal exposure, the damage to his reputation, the money he'd have to find. I need to think about this, he finally said. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, I call a lawyer. I hung up before he could respond. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I regretted the call, I didn't, but because the adrenaline of finally confronting my father was still coursing through my veins. I lay in bed, watching shadows move across the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my head. He hadn't denied it. That was the thing that kept circling back. When I'd accused him of theft, he hadn't said, "That's not true," or "You're wrong." He'd said, "It's more complicated than that." In my experience, "it's more complicated" was what people said when they couldn't defend their actions. Morning came slowly, gray light filtering through the white curtains. I showered, dressed, went downstairs for breakfast. Mrs. Chen had made her special French toast, and I ate it without tasting it, my mind elsewhere. My phone buzzed at 9:47 a.m., a text from my father. Dad, meet me at the hotel, conference room B. 11 a.m. Me. I'm not coming to the hotel. Dad, then name a place. We need to talk. Me. The coffee shop on Main Street, blue awning, 11 a.m. He didn't respond, but I knew he'd be there. He arrived exactly on time, which was typical. My father valued punctuality the way other people valued honesty. It was a principle he applied rigorously to others while exempting himself when convenient. Linda wasn't with him. That was my first observation. He'd come alone, which meant he was treating this as a negotiation rather than a confrontation. Good. Negotiations I could handle. He sat down across from me without greeting, his face arranged in the expression I thought of as serious business Tom, the one he used in board meetings and salary discussions. The documents you found, he said without preamble. Where did you get them? Does it matter? It matters to me. A family member gave them to me, someone who didn't know what they'd find. His jaw tightened. Patricia. Does it matter? I repeated. He studied me for a long moment. I let him. I had nothing to hide. What do you want? He finally asked. I told you last night. Full repayment of what you stole, and then we never speak again. That's not realistic. It's perfectly realistic. The money is quantified in those documents. You can liquidate assets, take out loans, sell Meredith's second car. I don't care how you get it. But you're going to pay back what you took, or I'm going to make sure everyone knows what kind of father you are. You'd drag this through court? Make it public? Think about what that would do to your reputation. I laughed. Actually laughed. Right there in the coffee shop, loud enough that the barista glanced over. My reputation, I said. That's your concern. Not your daughter's inheritance. Not your dead wife's wishes. My reputation. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I've spent 17 years worrying about what people think of me, I continued. Worrying about whether I'm good enough, successful enough, worthy enough to belong to your family. And you know what I learned? It doesn't matter. None of it matters. Because your family's opinion was bought with my mother's money. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is growing up wondering why your stepmother hates you, only to find out it's because your existence is evidence of the crime she committed. I leaned forward. What's not fair is working 3 jobs through college because your father told you the trust money was for later, when actually he'd already spent it on your stepsister's wedding. What's not fair is 17 years of being treated like garbage by people who were literally living off your inheritance. His face had gone slightly gray. Good. He should feel uncomfortable. I want the money, I said. Every cent plus interest. And I want it in 30 days. That's impossible. Then I guess we're going to court. I stood up, leaving the money on the table for my coffee. Olivia. His voice stopped me at the door. I know things weren't what they should have been. Between us. I turned, looked at him. Really looked, maybe for the first time. He was smaller than I remembered. Not physically. He was still the same height, the same build, but somehow diminished. The confident businessman, the distant father, the man who'd always seemed so in control of everything. He was just a man. A flawed, selfish, weak man who'd made choices he couldn't defend. No, I agreed. They weren't. I walked out. The next few days were strange. I extended my stay at the bed and breakfast. Mrs. Chen seemed pleased, and I found comfort in the routine I'd established. Breakfast in the courtyard, walks on the beach, dinners at Maria's restaurant. The peace I'd found before the revelation about my inheritance was still there underneath everything. Changed, maybe, more complicated, but still present. My father called 3 more times. I didn't answer. Linda texted once, a brief, sharp message about family loyalty that I deleted without responding. Meredith sent nothing, which was probably wise of her. Aunt Patricia reached out again, this time just to check on me. We had coffee at the same shop where she'd shown me the folder, and she told me more about what she'd observed over the years. Linda's careful management of finances, my father's passive complicity, the way both of them had constructed a narrative in which I was the problem rather than the victim. I should have seen it sooner, she said, stirring her tea. I should have asked questions. You couldn't have known. I should have known. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed. I watched them treat you like an afterthought for years, and I told myself it was just personality differences, family dynamics. I didn't want to see what was really happening. Most people don't. That's not an excuse. No, but it's an explanation. We sat in silence for a while, watching the afternoon light shift through the windows. What are you going to do? She finally asked. Wait, I said. See what he offers, and then decide. The offer came a week later. An email from my father's lawyer, not my father himself, which said everything about how he was approaching this: legal language, formal structure, a proposed settlement that included repayment of the original trust amount, plus some interest in exchange for my signature on a non-disclosure agreement. They wanted to pay me off and shut me up. I forwarded the email to a lawyer I'd found through Maria's network, a woman named Susan who specialized in estate disputes and had a reputation for being ruthless. She read through the proposal and laughed. This is insulting, she said. They're offering you about 60% of what you're owed, and they want you to never talk about it? No. I don't necessarily want to talk about it. That's your choice, but the NDA is a red flag. They're scared of exposure, which means we have leverage. She leaned back in her chair. Let me counter-propose. Full restitution plus damages, no NDA, and a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. We'll see how they respond. Won't that make things worse? For them, yes. For you? She smiled. You've already lost whatever relationship you had with these people. Might as well get what you're owed. She was right. I'd already walked out of the hotel, already confronted my father, already accepted that the family I'd spent 17 years trying to join had never wanted me. What was left to protect? Send the counter, I said. The next month was a blur of legal communications. My father's lawyers pushed back, Susan pushed harder. There were phone calls and emails and documents flying back and forth, each exchange raising the temperature slightly. I stayed at the bed and breakfast through all of it. Mrs. Chen had given me a discounted rate for long-term stays, and I'd fallen into a rhythm that felt almost like a life. Morning walks, afternoon work. I'd started doing freelance data analysis from my laptop. Evening dinners with Maria or Aunt Patricia, or sometimes just alone with a book. The settlement negotiations dragged on. My father tried to involve Linda, which Susan shut down immediately. Meredith apparently threw a fit when she learned the details of what was happening, demanding that I stop trying to destroy the family. I didn't respond. Bradley's startup, the one funded by my mother's money, was struggling. I learned this from Aunt Patricia, who had become an unlikely ally. Apparently, the business had been on shaky ground for months, and the prospect of paying back a significant investment was causing serious stress. I didn't feel bad about that. Bradley had built his company on my inheritance. If it collapsed when that foundation was removed, that was a consequence he should have anticipated. Finally, 6 weeks after I'd walked out of the Grand Meridian, Susan called with news. "They've agreed," she said. "Full restitution plus interest, no NDA, and a written acknowledgement that funds were improperly transferred from your trust. Your father signed it this morning." I sat down on the edge of my bed, the phone pressed to my ear, and felt something release in my chest. "It's over?" "The legal part is over. The money should be in your account within 10 business days." She paused. "How do you feel?" I considered the question. How did I feel? Not triumphant, not vindicated, not even particularly satisfied. Mostly, I felt tired. And underneath the tiredness, something else. Something that might have been relief. "I feel like I can finally move on," I said. The money arrived 8 days later. It was a significant amount. Enough to change my life if I wanted it to, enough to buy a house, start a business, travel the world. Enough to fund the future my mother had intended for me 22 years late. I looked at the number on my screen for a long time. Thought about my mother, who I barely remembered. Thought about the trust she'd established, the hope she must have had for my future income. Thought about the years I'd spent working 3 jobs, earning scholarships, building a career from nothing while her money was being spent on people who despised me. I thought about Linda's face, which I would probably never see again. My father's voice, which I would probably never hear again. Meredith's contempt, which I would never again have to endure. And I thought about the bed and breakfast, and Mrs. Chen's garden, and Maria's friendship, and the view of the harbor from the bench where I liked to sit in the evenings. I'd lost a family, but I'd found something else, something smaller, quieter, less impressive than the polished image Linda had always cultivated. But something real. I called Mrs. Chen. "I'd like to extend my stay," I said. "Maybe indefinitely. Do you know anyone selling property in town?" 3 months later, I owned a small house 2 blocks from the beach. It wasn't fancy, a cottage really, with a garden that needed work and a kitchen that needed updating. But it was mine. Bought with my mother's money, finally used for its intended purpose. I'd started a small data consulting business, nothing dramatic, just freelance work for local businesses who needed help making sense of their numbers. The income was modest but steady, and the work gave me purpose without consuming me. Maria and I had dinner together most weeks. Aunt Patricia visited occasionally, having distanced herself from Linda after the truth came out. Mrs. Chen brought me vegetables from her garden and advice I didn't always follow. I'd built a life. Not the life I'd imagined back when I was still trying to earn a place in my father's family, but a real life. One that belonged to me. There's an ending to this story, though it's not the kind of ending I once would have wanted. I never saw my father again. He died 2 years after the settlement. A heart attack, sudden and final. I learned about it from Aunt Patricia, who called to tell me before the obituary was published. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't send flowers or condolences or any of the gestures that might have signaled reconciliation. I simply didn't. And in that absence, in that choice not to perform a grief I didn't feel, I found a kind of peace. Linda sold the house and moved to Florida. Meredith's marriage to Bradley lasted another 18 months before collapsing under the weight of financial stress and mutual resentment. Connor grew up and, according to Aunt Patricia, turned out surprisingly well, gentler than his mother, more thoughtful than his grandmother. I never heard from any of them directly, and I never reached out. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I sit on my porch and watch the sunset over the water. I think about my mother, who I barely knew. I wonder what she would think of the life I've built, the choices I've made, the person I've become. I hope she'd be proud. I hope she'd understand why I had to walk away from everything she'd married into, even if it meant walking away from her memory too. I think about forgiveness and whether I've achieved it. The honest answer is complicated. I don't wish my father or Linda or Meredith harm, but I also don't wish them well. Mostly, I don't think about them at all. They're part of a past that no longer defines me, characters in a story I'm no longer telling. I think about belonging and how I spent so many years searching for it in the wrong places. The family I tried so hard to join was never going to accept me, not because I wasn't worthy, but because my existence threatened their careful fiction. They needed me to be small and grateful and invisible. They needed me to not ask questions about money or fairness or the promises my mother made before she died. Well, I asked, and now I'm free. The thing about walking away is that you don't always know where you're going. When I left the Grand Meridian that night, suitcase in hand, I had no plan, no destination, no sense of what my life would look like without the family I'd spent 17 years trying to please. I thought I was giving up. I thought walking away meant losing. I thought the only options were belonging or emptiness, acceptance, or isolation. But there's another option, one I didn't discover until I was sitting in a coffee shop, watching a stranger's yacht, wondering what escape actually meant. You can build something new. You can choose your own family, your own home, your own definition of success. You can take the money your mother left you and use it to create a life she would have wanted for you. You can stop performing worthiness for people who will never see you clearly. You can stop waiting to be chosen and choose yourself instead. I'm writing this on a Tuesday evening, the sunset turning the water gold outside my window. My house is quiet. My garden is growing. Tomorrow I'll have coffee with Maria and work on a project for a client, and maybe take a walk on the beach if the weather holds. It's not a dramatic life. There's no triumphant revenge, no public humiliation of my enemies, no moment where everyone realizes how wrong they were about me. The people who hurt me are still out there living their lives, probably not thinking about me at all, but I'm not thinking about them either, and that, I've learned, is its own kind of victory. There's one more thing. A few months after I settled into my new house, I found a photograph. It was tucked into the back of one of the boxes I'd shipped from my old apartment. A picture I didn't remember keeping, of a woman with dark hair and a smile I almost recognized. My mother, young, maybe 25, standing in front of a house that looked a lot like the cottage I'd just bought. Small, near the water, nothing fancy. I didn't know the context. Didn't know when it was taken or why, but something about the image felt important. Like a message across time from the mother I barely remembered to the daughter I'd become. "This is what I wanted for you," I imagined her saying. "Not the big house, not the approval of people who don't deserve you, just this. A life of your own, a place to belong." I framed the photograph and hung it in my kitchen. Every morning when I make my coffee, I see her face, and I know I've finally come home. For anyone reading this who recognizes themselves in my story, sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep. Sometimes the people who should love you are the ones who hurt you most. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find what you actually need. If you're still waiting for them to see you, stop. They won't. They can't. Their blindness is about them, not you. Walk away. Build something new. Find your people, your place, your peace. It's possible, I know, because I did it, and if I can, so can you.